There are places where people should never be alone. Dark gorges, deserted caves, and icy expanses hide terrible secrets that the authorities are trying with all their might to keep quiet. Tourists disappear, and when they are found, all that remains is a bitter nickname: Jane Doe. The bodies of these unfortunate souls always look strange. No signs of a struggle, no obvious injuries, just terrifying horror in their wide-open eyes and vague, inexplicable mutilations. Officially, all these cases are dismissed as accidents, hypothermia, or animal attacks. But the truth is much more terrifying. What is really happening in the national parks of the United States? Prepare to hear stories that will change the way you look at forests, mountains, and caves forever. In the winter of 2020, an incident occurred in Denali National Park, Alaska, that was quickly classified and did not receive widespread media coverage. However, the few people who managed to get hold of snippets of information remembered the ash hut and the unknown woman found in the tent for a long time. It all happened in mid-January, when the weather in northern Alaska is particularly harsh. Long hours of twilight, squally winds, heavy snowfall, and extremely low temperatures. Denali National Park attracts extreme sports enthusiasts from all over the world, but in winter it is usually deserted, except for the occasional climber and ranger patrolling certain areas. On that day, according to official reports, 2 rangers, Ryan Morgan and Jennifer Hill, set out on a raid along one of the less-traveled sections to check reference points. They had been informed that an unusual glow had been seen the day before near the far edge of the park. In winter, Denali is usually visited by enthusiasts of the northern lights or polar night observations, but the area where the rangers were headed was not officially designated for camping. There were no equipped trails or good communication. The fact that there had been a heavy snowstorm during the night was also alarming, so setting up a tent or camp in this area seemed like a rather bold move. Ryan and Jennifer, dressed in thick winter suits and snowshoes, struggled through the deep snow drifts. The frost was bitter, minus 30 degrees Celsius, and the wind whipped the snowflakes into the air. Around noon, when the dim sun was barely visible behind the horizontal clouds, they actually saw a small tent. It stood on a relatively flat area where the mountain slopes formed a kind of bowl. There were no ski tracks or footprints around it. It looked as if the tent had grown there by itself. As they approached, the rangers noticed that the fabric of the tent was not even noticeably icy, as if it had not been there for very long. Jennifer called out, "Anyone there?" but received no answer. Ryan bent down and slowly unfastened the entrance, afraid that a strong gust of wind might tear the seams. Inside, there was a strange, oppressive silence. He shone his flashlight, and at first it seemed as if there was a gray film covering everything. Only after looking more closely did they see that it was a thin layer of ash, as if someone had burned something inside, but there was no fire or traces of burning. On the floor, near a rug, lay the body of a woman. She appeared to be between 20 and 30 years old, although it was difficult to determine her exact age due to the lighting and the film of ash. She was wearing only thermal overalls with a light jacket thrown over them, clearly unsuitable for the Alaskan winter. Her arms lay along her body, and her face, turned toward the entrance, seemed completely calm, as if she had fallen asleep or simply closed her eyes in a semi-conscious state. But when Jennifer came closer, it became clear that her eyes were open, only her gaze was unseeing. Ryan immediately felt for her pulse and realized that the woman was dead. At first glance, there was no blood, no wounds, no damage to her clothing. However, the layer of gray ash covering her hair and the rug was shocking. Where did it come from, when there was only snow and ice around? An attempt to brush off the ash revealed an even more unusual detail. Its particles did not have the smell characteristic of burning and did not stain the fingers like ordinary ash. It seemed to stick to the fabric, but when he ran his hand over it, it fell back in an even layer. It was as if someone had carefully sprinkled the ashes, trying to leave the entire tent in a barely noticeable gray hue. No one noticed a stove, a primus, or even less, a campfire. Only a regular backpack, partially open, and a couple of empty plastic water bottles. No documents were found on the woman. Jennifer exchanged glances with Ryan, and they both decided to call for backup. They reported over the radio that they had found the body of an unknown female tourist and asked for specialists to be sent. Soon, a small helicopter landed at the foot of the mountain, bringing forensic experts and 2 experienced rangers who were veterans of the area. When they arrived and began to examine the body, even more strange things came to light. There were no obvious external injuries, either from the cold or from violence. The legs and arms showed no signs of frostbite, which is usually seen in victims of hypothermia. But the most gruesome discovery was made by the forensic expert when the woman's clothes were removed. A huge hole was found in her stomach, covered with ash, and her internal organs were missing. According to eyewitnesses, her face remained peaceful. The corners of her mouth were slightly raised, as if she had seen something beautiful in her last moments. Her eyes were normal, except for their lifeless gaze. Her abdominal cavity was empty. No stomach, no liver, no heart. Even her lungs had disappeared from her chest. But there were no signs of blood, no mess inside, as if someone had carefully gutted the woman. Obviously, something like this could not go unnoticed in official reports. But about 2 days later, state police arrived, along with men in plain clothes, as the local park employees put it. They quickly hushed up the case, asked the park employees to sign non-disclosure agreements, and then took the body away. In one evening, it was all over. The tent was taken away, the site was cleared of ashes, and instructions were given not to publish any details. Only a brief statement appeared in the official reports. A woman was found dead from hypothermia, identity unknown. A number of rangers noticed the inconsistency. How could they declare that she had died of hypothermia when her clothes and appearance did not match the classic picture of a frozen person? But park officials advised everyone to mind their own business, adding that if there was a lot of noise, an investigation from Washington would soon follow. Rumors among employees, however, could not be silenced. Some said that it could have been a female experimenter who was being subjected to some kind of experiment. Others said it was a natural phenomenon linked to abnormal volcanic activity, which would explain the ash. But Denali is not a volcano, of course, and the area is geologically stable in terms of eruptions. Others put forward the hypothesis of paranormal phenomena, such as ball lightning, which burned the organs, and the ash was the remains of unknown energy. Interestingly, laboratory analysis of the ash itself showed a structure unlike typical ash, from burning wood or tissue. It contained elevated levels of some microscopic silicate particles and was free of the carbon component usually found in combustion products. The chemical composition remained unclear for quick classification. However, the sample sent for analysis also disappeared, according to the same source. In the end, the people at Denali Park preferred to forget about the story, as it was winter and there were no large numbers of tourists at that time of year. In the spring, a flurry of new events, an influx of visitors, and the daily routine distracted everyone. All that remains is the disturbing image in the oral memory of the rangers and a few office staff. An empty tent on an endless snowfield, a thin layer of gray ash inside, and the peaceful face of a woman whose body had been stripped of all internals, organs. In the fall of 2007, an event occurred in Zion National Park, Utah, that many visitors and rangers remember with grim bewilderment. At the end of October, a group of tourists climbing to one of the most popular viewpoints, Angel's Landing, stumbled upon the body of a woman. This place, known for its breathtaking views and extremely narrow ridge, usually attracts thrill seekers, as there are sheer canyons hundreds of meters deep below. But on that day, the travelers expected to see a majestic landscape, and instead they came across a disturbing discovery at the very edge of a sheer cliff. When they noticed the woman, people initially thought she might just be dozing or sitting there thinking, as her posture was unusual. She was lying slightly on her side, with her eyes and mouth wide open. But as they got closer, the tourists realized she wasn't moving. They immediately called the rangers, who arrived half an hour or so later. At the scene, one of the National Park employees, Adam Goodman, and his colleague, Ashley Barker, examined the body. At first, it seemed like an accident. Falls from heights happen here more often than we'd like. However, the deceased showed no external signs of serious injuries typical of a fall from a great height. No fractures or bruises, and her posture did not look at all like that of a person who had fallen into the abyss. The woman was lying on a rocky ledge no more than a few meters from the edge. Her face was frozen in a grimace of horror. Her mouth was wide open, and her eyes were so wide that it seemed as if, in the last moment of her life, she had seen something so terrible that she could neither scream nor look away. Another oddity noticed by the rangers was that her hands were badly scratched. It looked as if she had been struggling and fighting something, but no visible enemies or footprints indicating the presence of another person were found in the area. The ground at the edge of the cliff was compacted, but this could have been the result of frequent visits by tourists themselves. There was no backpack or bag near the body. In the pockets of her jacket, apart from small items such as a packet of cookies and a piece of paper bag, only a small notebook was found. There were no initials on the cover, but inside were brief notes about a trip to Zion Park. The woman had clearly started writing recently. At the top of the pages were barely legible lines about how she had finally made it to the place she had long dreamed of. There were no signatures or names, so it was difficult to establish her identity. Judging by the content, she was probably an independent traveler who had come here for the first time. The police officers who arrived discussed possible scenarios. The first was suicide. But everything seemed very illogical for a typical case, as the woman had not jumped into the abyss, and there were no signs of cuts or intentional wounds on her body indicating a desire to end her life. The second was assault or murder. However, no signs of a struggle were found, except for scratches on her hands, which could have been defensive, and there were no fingerprints or traces of blood from an unknown person. The third was a sudden heart attack or suffocation due to some kind of severe fright. But then it is unclear what could have frightened her so much and why she was lying practically at the edge of the canyon in such a position. The medical examiner who examined the body found no serious bone damage. The heart and lungs also did not appear to be catastrophically altered. An external examination revealed no poisonous bites or other signs of violence. It was decided to conduct a more thorough examination, but as it later turned out, the official results remained incomplete. The authorities did not find any documents that could help identify the tourist. Information about missing women of that age during that season yielded no matches, not a single one that matched her description. A photograph of her face taken by forensic experts did not help to find a match in local databases or in various posts on social media. She was dubbed Jane Doe of Zion Canyon. Several facts fueled the rumors. First, her mouth and eyes were wide open. One ranger whispered to a colleague, "It's as if she saw something frightening while standing at the edge of the cliff and then died of terror without taking a step back." Second, the scratches on her hands. If she was trying to defend herself, what was she defending herself from? Were they branches from a bush in the wind, or was she desperately waving away something better left unspoken? Finally, there were no injuries indicating a fall. After all, it would have been very easy to fall there. But the woman apparently died where she was found, without any injuries to her body. As a result, the case of Doe of Zion quickly faded from the headlines. The police listed the cause of death as undetermined in their final report, including the possibility of acute heart failure. A week or two later, a couple of local media outlets published brief articles. Unknown traveler found dead at cliff. Identity unidentified. Mystery enthusiasts began flocking to the park, trying to find out what she had seen that caused her to scream in silence. But the administration only said that the cause of death was an accident, probably related to the treacherous terrain, although the rangers themselves knew that this was just speculation. Thus, the story of Jane Doe from Zion Canyon remains unresolved. The body was buried in a local cemetery after standard procedures, and the notebook with travel notes is kept by the police. Perhaps someday a relative will come forward who can recognize the handwriting. In June 2010, an incident occurred in Mammoth Cave National Park, Kentucky, that still haunts the few employees who remember the details. Mammoth Cave is known as one of the longest caves in the world, with endless corridors and branches where even experienced rangers often have to navigate using maps and markers. Some parts of the cave complex are so remote and complex that they are only visited by enthusiastic speleologists and researchers seeking to discover new underground labyrinths. However, on that occasion, it was not a new explorer who was found in such a remote corner, but the body of an unknown man. That day, 2 rangers, Adam Bennett and Mary Lawrence, were conducting a routine inspection of remote branches that were rarely visited by ordinary tourists. They were motivated by routine safety checks and curiosity about whether a small group of cavers had ventured too far. It was rumored that someone had been trying to enter a closed section of the cave in recent weeks without permission. Adam and Mary descended several levels below the standard tour route to check the integrity of the ropes and the technical equipment. The air was damp and cold, and the ceiling and walls cast strange shadows in the light of the flashlights. When the rangers found themselves in a corridor referred to in the documents as the 5th level knot, Adam suddenly noticed something unusual on the floor, several dark spots on the damp limestone. Looking closer, he realized it was blood that hadn't completely dried yet. The traces ran along the wall and disappeared into a small hatch. Mary frowned and lit the way with her flashlight, a bad feeling growing inside her. She had never seen anything like this in these chambers before. They followed the stains and, after walking about 10 meters through a narrow passage, came out into a small natural room. And there, against the wall, they saw the body of a man. Adam immediately noted that there should definitely not be any accidental tourists at this level of the cave. You could only get here with professional training and special permits, or in the case of illegal entry. But why would anyone want to go so deep? Looking at the man, the rangers were met with a horrific sight. His face was covered in bruises and blood, and there were deep lacerations on his cheek and forehead. Such wounds did not look like typical marks from falling on sharp rocks, and the man himself was sitting with his back against the wall, as if he had been thrown there or was trying to find support before dying. He was not holding any objects in his hand, but a flashlight with batteries inserted lay on the floor 1.5 meters away. When checked, the batteries were fully charged. It seemed that the flashlight could have continued to burn for a long time, so darkness should not have been the cause of his death. But then what? The lacerations did not match knife wounds or the bites of a large animal, which incidentally did not live in the depths of the cave. Forensic experts later examined the cuts and concluded that the instrument used to inflict them could not be identified. It seemed as if the man had been attacked by some unknown force, as if the uneven lacerations on his skin were the result of some kind of violent struggle. But what or who was he defending himself from? The body had no documents or wallet. His clothing did not allow for even an approximate determination of his social status. He was wearing standard thick pants, hiking shoes, and a jacket with no identifying marks. The pockets were empty, no phone, no keys, no cash, so it was not possible to immediately establish the man's identity. Later, when all reports of missing persons in the region were checked, no matches were found. He was named John Doe of Mammoth Cave, after the term often used in the U.S. for unidentified bodies. Questions arose. How did he get into the deep part of the cave, bypassing the closed areas and security? Why didn't he leave any clues as to where he came from? And what killed him in the end? When forensic experts were called in, they found no clear evidence at the crime scene. No traces of foreign boots, except for the footprints of 2 rangers and the man himself, were difficult to discern on the damp limestone. Still, investigators speculated that if he had not been alone, the second person could have remained in the darkness. Or perhaps the man was wandering alone and encountered something that disfigured his face. Forensic experts examined the body and found no fatal internal injuries other than blood loss. But even that did not appear to be enough to kill a person instantly. The autopsy showed that the heart was healthy, the lungs showed no signs of suffocation, and the skull bones were intact except for external wounds. Theoretically, he could have died from shock or infection, but this did not fit the short time frame, as the condition of the blood and wounds indicated that death had occurred no more than a few hours before discovery. All materials related to the case were soon taken over by a special department of the Kentucky State Police. The official report stated, "Unknown male, unidentified, death under unclear circumstances." Mamontov Cave's reports contained a brief note. A deceased person was found at a deep level. No legal permits were issued to descend there. The police are investigating the possibility of illegal entry and an accident. At the same time, no one could logically explain how the man died or why his face was so badly mutilated. Some rangers whispered among themselves that in the darkest depths of the cave, one could encounter geological anomalies or rare colonies of animals capable of aggressive behavior. But none of the known animals here were known to behave in such a way. Others recalled strange stories about voices and distant rustling in the lower levels, which experienced speleologists sometimes heard. But all these speculations remain nothing more than myths and gossip. So John Doe from Mammoth Cave remained in the papers as an unidentified victim of a mysterious incident. The body was eventually handed over to the authorities, who organized an unnamed funeral, and the lantern found nearby is kept somewhere in the police archives. Park employees prefer not to discuss the subject, fearing unnecessary questions from visitors. All that remains in the memories of tourists is the strange story of a man who entered the depths of the underground corridors and never returned. The cause of his death and his very appearance remain shrouded in mystery, like the darkness that reigns in the ancient and endless halls of the Mammoth Cave. That's all, friends. If you like these creepy stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Write in the comments which stories impressed you the most and whether you would like us to continue uncovering the mysteries of national parks and wildlife. And to make sure you don't miss the next episodes, click on the bell. Take care, and remember, sometimes the truth is scarier than any legend.